Hi, everyone. Welcome to Better Culture's webinar, where we will be making the case that every organization needs to designate a Chief Culture Officer. We'll also be sharing specifically the 4 keys to unlocking the full impact of a Chief Culture Officer. My name is David Orrick. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Kim Hogeveen today, who will be presenting. First, let me give you a quick background about what we do at Better Culture and why we're so excited to talk with you today. Our company is dedicated to making the world a better place to work, something we accomplish through culture assessments, leadership training, consultation, and big initiatives like what you're going to hear about today. You can visit us at betterculture.com to learn more. A psychologist by training, Dr. H has an unusual background that combines deep theoretical understanding with a terrific record of real-world accomplishments with respect to all things leadership and culture. He did ask me to keep this short, but just so you understand, Kim founded Better Culture after being a successful CEO for 24 years, building a remarkable company that was recognized 5 times as the #1 best place to work. Kim stepped down from his role at QLI in 2010, and in response to requests from many business leaders, he developed Mindset, a leadership training and consulting company that has now worked with scores of businesses and companies throughout the region. In 2020, Kim co-founded Better Culture, where through a digital-first training model, we can now deliver that same powerful content to a much broader range of companies. Kim's presented insights on leadership and culture to well over 1,000 companies and has delivered keynote speeches from California to Rome. But today, Kim's focused on something that we believe offers a huge insight to any individual leaders or companies who are genuinely ready to find traction on this huge issue of culture. If you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to put those in the chat, and we'll be sure to follow up individually after the webinar. But without further ado, I'll turn things over to Kim.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I'm excited to have all of you joining us today. I'm going to make a few preliminary comments about just the value of culture. And the truth is, this is about equivalent anymore to saying water is wet. I don't think there are many people that dispute the fact that a dynamic, healthy work environment contributes to the success of almost any enterprise. We've been saying this for a number of years, actually since we started Mindset in 2010. And that is that better culture results in better business. Some things go up when we have a really healthy culture. Things like employee engagement, productivity, innovation, customer satisfaction, blue sky in your own local community, and some things go down like turnover and wasteful spending, employee misconduct, litigation and risk, customer complaints, etc. But it's not just us that recognizes this connection between culture and better business. There is an avalanche, really, of information, data, research data out there that purports to prove, and I believe it does, this connection between a healthy culture and exceptionally successful, dominating business. I think Forbes summed it up well when they cited mountains of research stating this: just about any measure that improves the life and satisfaction of an employee will in turn improve their performance at work and, boy, the organization as a whole. But there is substantial yet room for improvement. A few stats I pulled quickly. 92% of CEOs say their organizations are empathetic. Unfortunately, only 50% of their employees agree. 33% of employees say their manager does a poor job of building and protecting a healthy culture. 55% of millennials are not satisfied currently with their career paths. Only 25% of US employees stay in their jobs for more than 5 years today, and 75% of those employees who left their company did so, according to their own self-reports, because of a manager or a leader inside that organization. And a full 25% of employees dread going into work every day. 56% of employees see no career advancement opportunities where they're presently working. 69% say they would actually work harder if their company was just a little bit better at recognizing their effort. And this last one is a bit amusing to me. I think there's a bidding war on this one. The last stats that I pulled said staff turnover costs in the US are costing $1 trillion every year. 10, 15 years ago, I saw numbers like 100 million, and then I saw someone say 250 million, then a half, then billions of dollars started coming in, and then 50 billion, 75 billion, 500 billion. Well, now the bid's up to $1 trillion. I don't know what the actual number is, but I do know this. Today, whether you're running a hospital or a tire repair shop, or you're trying to run a manufacturing plant, the biggest challenge our clients have is how can they attract, build, motivate, and retain quality staff. These stats tell us that we can do better. We should do better. We can do much better. And I believe these stats suggest that there's a significant gap between what leaders are saying they want. They recognize culture is important, but what they actually have in their work settings. Which leads to this question: why that gap? Why that gap between what executives say they want for a healthy culture and what they actually have? Well, for several years, we've pointed out there's 4 primary reasons for that gap. Number one, some people simply don't know how to create a healthy culture, and they feel too overwhelmed to take the time to learn how to do it. Another reason for that gap can be the executives in that company think they know how to build a healthy culture when in fact they don't. This is called in psychology illusory superiority. Another reason for the gap, sometimes they don't even see it. This is when you have an executive team that maybe doesn't get out in the world much. They actually think their culture is exceptional because they've never actually witnessed what a dynamic, exceptional culture is like. And the fourth possible reason, they don't want a healthy culture badly enough to really go out and create it and then protect it every day. You don't get an exceptionally great culture by, it would be nice if we stumbled into it. You have to really want it, and it must remain a priority. Now, that's what we've been saying for the past several years. But today, I want to mention that there's another reason for the gap. And I have come to believe that this may be the most common reason for the gap between what they say they want for culture and what they actually have. And I believe it may be the most problematic. The fifth possible reason for the gap is this: companies are failing to designate a specific individual to oversee and drive cultural health. Now, they may have a culture committee that meets once a month and talks about an event we can do to raise morale. But when I talk to these kind of companies, they frequently say, well, no, we don't have one person driving this, Kim. Everybody sort of does culture. Well, here's the truth. If everybody's got it, nobody's got it. And that is a significant problem. So I want to talk to you today about how we start to address this fifth reason. How do we address this challenge that nobody is designated to oversee and drive cultural health? Well, it starts, obviously enough, we believe, by companies designating what we term a chief culture officer, somebody who will drive your efforts to build and protect culture. Now, one of the things I want to make clear at this point, I'm not talking about hiring a separate individual unless you have a company of substantial size. I'm talking about someone within your existing management team being accountable for driving cultural health. But I want to give you a caution. We think designating a chief culture officer is a massive opportunity to actually improve and develop your culture, but it's one that will easily be missed. It's a great example of companies getting the what right, but the implementation wrong. And I want to spend a little bit of time explaining to you why it will be so easy to miss this opportunity. I want to start by having you consider other operational leaders in a typical company: your chief financial officer, your chief HR officer, your chief technology officer. Let's just take those three. For those individuals to be successful in their roles, they must have four essential things, four keys to their success. Those four things are knowledge. They have to know something. Your CFO has gone to school and been trained and learned a body of knowledge that allows them to be effective in their role, as does your chief technology officer, as does your chief HR officer. They then have to have access to a set of tools that they can use to be effective in that role. For example, your chief financial officer needs to have tools that can help them with budgeting processes and processing payments and dashboards that can keep track of revenue and expenses. Your chief HR officer needs to have things like tools that can help them with payroll administration and recruitment management and benefits monitoring and employee evaluations and employee contract forms. All of those allow them to make use of the knowledge they have effectively. The third thing they must have is ongoing support. Your chief HR officer needs to be able to know, who do I turn to when I run into a particularly sticky situation? They typically have their legal counsel on speed dial. They also need to have support so they can stay abreast of the latest developments in their areas of expertise. They may have professional associations, or the CTO may have a colleague that's a CTO in another organization that is a particular support for them, where they can turn when they need more IQ points to solve a challenging problem or take advantage of an opportunity. And the fourth thing they must have to be effective is power. Your CFO, your chief HR officer will not be and cannot be effective in their organizations unless they are given adequate power to see that they can have the impact they want to have. Now, I want to take a look for a second at this idea of having a designated chief culture officer and what it is they need to have to be effective in their role. Let's look at those four key elements. Knowledge. I would challenge you. What knowledge? What is the body of knowledge that a chief culture officer needs to have to be effective? Where do you go to school? What certification or degree do you get to say, I've acquired the necessary knowledge to be effective as a chief culture officer, just as someone would to be effective as a chief HR officer? Tools. What tools? Is there any clarity of thought out there on what tools a chief culture officer needs to have available at their fingertips to be effective? Support. From where? Where do they turn for expert guidance? Where do they go for ongoing development, keeping them abreast of the best and most current thoughts in the area of developing and protecting culture? And finally, power. Now, this is an interesting one. And I would contend they should only be given power within your system if they have knowledge and can go somewhere for expert support. You would not want to give power to a chief financial officer who didn't know much of anything and had nowhere to go for outside support. That would be a disaster. Same with a chief technology officer. Would you give them power in your system if they had no knowledge, no tools, and no support? Of course not. So this fifth reason, failure to designate a specific individual to oversee and drive cultural health. How are we going to go about addressing this issue? Well, that's what I want to talk with you about today. It's what we're going to be doing with a big initiative out of our company, Better Culture. We're calling it the Chief Culture Officer Launch Program. We're going to be on a mission to help chief culture officers be effective. Now, this is going to be true whether it's someone who's coming new into this role or working with someone who's already in the role. Sometimes the title might be Chief People Officer. There's a number of different titles, but the thrust is the same. Their job is to help individuals grow and the culture be healthy. We're putting together a program that we hope can launch these individuals into being as effective as possible within their companies. We're going to be doing this through a 2-day intensive training sessions that we're going to bring people in for, live training and programming, and they'll be leaving with a sizable body of knowledge, some tools they can use, and the opportunity for ongoing support. Now, let me lay out the case a little bit as to what we're going to be doing with this launch program. Let's talk about some examples of what I mean by there's a body of knowledge that we want these individuals to have. Some of the things we'll be working with them on are how they can accurately assess cultural health. We want them to be able to have an array of ideas and initiatives that will enhance an organization's ability to improve your retention rates of employees. We want them to be able to spot supervisory talent early and take steps to start preparing those individuals to take more responsibility within their company. This is a big role for a chief culture officer. Sometimes you're working on systems level issues, but much of the time you'll also want to be coaching individual supervisors. So much happens on your culture at the level of the relationship between the employee and their immediate supervisor. So to be effective, a chief culture officer needs to be able to be a coach and a mentor to frontline supervisors. Some examples of what we want you to be able to work with them on. We want you to be able to work with your frontline supervisors so that they are better able to engender pride in your employees. I don't have time today to go into this at depth, but we have a mindset culture survey product that we've used now on scores of companies. And one of the things we're finding across the 14 key domains we assess, that the number one predictor of overall cultural health is the degree to which your employees feel proud to be part of their company. Supervisors are the ones that have the opportunity and the responsibility to build that pride. Chief culture officers need to be prepared to train those supervisors how to not miss those opportunities. Other things that we want you to be able to coach your supervisors on. How can they grow people into stars? We can't always hire on a 1 to 10 scale, an 8 or a 9 right in off the street. Sometimes we hire a 5. But if they get an effective supervisor that knows how to grow them both personally and professionally, we can turn that individual into a 7, an 8, or even a 9. And the interesting thing is when you grow your staff, their loyalty back to the company is usually exceptionally strong. We want you to be able to work with supervisors so that they protect what we call in our terminology, leadership principle number 4, which is good staff have an absolute right to work with good staff. So supervisors need to know how they can hold employees accountable effectively. And then a lot of individuals who get promoted into supervisory roles would be successful but for their ability to effectively handle conflict. A chief culture officer needs to be able to coach and counsel them in this area so that they feel more confident in their ability to do so. Another huge opportunity for chief culture officers is to recognize, both with supervisors and with just frontline staff, how powerful, more effective active listening can be. And we want to give them, our chief culture officers, a training program that can emphasize this and help individuals improve in that area. Other things we want the chief culture officer to do for the system as a whole. We want them to have a number of ideas on how they can infuse energy and fun into the work setting, how they can take a program where they can train their employees on the power of them serving as PR agents for their colleagues and what that can do for the image of the company. We want our chief culture officer to have input on ideas related to compensation and how we can maximize motivation by how we do our compensation and the techniques we use. This is a huge one, absolutely huge. So many companies are missing so many opportunities to more effectively recognize the efforts and contributions of their employees. This is an area a chief culture officer should hit out of the park. We want them to be able to I mentioned earlier to recognize talent early. Well, we want them to have an entire program as to how they can invest early in their rising stars. A number of our clients that are not being effective in this area right now are losing a lot of employees sometime between 6 months and 18 months from hire. It seems to be a real danger point. And there are things the chief culture officer should be able to suggest and implement that will mitigate that employee loss. We want them to know how to create a dynamic and effective career ladder program. One of the biggest misses that I see companies missing, particularly for hourly employees, this is a massive mistake not to create effective career ladder programs. And finally, we want our chief culture officers to understand tools and techniques that can tilt the world in favor of your best employees. Increase the influence of the stars within your system. That's an example of the content knowledge we want to make sure Better Culture chief culture officers have and can use in their settings. When we talk about tools, what tools do you want to make available to a chief culture officer? Well, I'll go through these quickly, with maybe the exception of the last one. If they don't want to use our survey instrument, that's fine, but they do need to know how to select an effective survey instrument, and particularly how to interpret the data accurately and what to do after the survey, how to effectively give feedback to the staff once the data has been collected. We'll give them a predictive index that allows them to spot supervisory talent earlier and more quickly. A wide array of executive coaching tools. This relates back to my point that the chief culture officer will be doing some things at the systems level, but they'll also be frequently working with an individual supervisor to help them be more effective. One of those tools we'll give them is something we call the Backbone and Heart Supervisor Assessment Tool that allows you to identify where there are significant growth opportunities for an individual supervisor to be more effective. This next one is a massive resource that we want to make available to all of our chief culture officers. This is an online, on-demand leadership program that we have built out and recorded. It consists now of 56 brief videos, each 3 to maybe 4 or 5 minutes, all organized around specific insights that a leader needs to have to be more effective at building and protecting a healthy culture. This online program can be used 2 ways. The chief culture officer can work with a group, take them through the entire program and facilitate it. We think it's as good a leadership development program as there is out there on the market. It can also be used more strategically with an individual supervisor who's struggling with some specific aspect of leadership. So we could say, how about you watch video 46 and we talk about that next Tuesday? I think it'll give you some thoughts and insights as to how you can handle this situation well. A team assessment tool that will allow the chief culture officer to work with a supervisor to help them get an accurate feel for what's going on in terms of team dynamics on a specific work group. A mentor training program, a specific process of how to utilize mentoring to build your stars. This is a great idea. Again, often fails because mentoring programs are not implemented well. The idea is good, the implementation flops. And then finally, something that we will probably be doing an entire webinar on quite soon. We've spent a lot of time building out what we call the 20 tenets of culture. Today, I'll just say this is an instrument that is not for leaders, but for every individual that works for a company. It's a constructive process that allows them to do a self-analysis of their own attitudes and behaviors, and then identify a couple spots where they can make improvement. It will help them be more successful at work. It will also help them be more successful at life. We've put together the assessment instrument as well as coaching videos, brief coaching videos that they can access both for the individuals, and a supervisor can use those coaching videos in a team setting to spur discussion about how well are we living up to this specific tenet with respect to how we interact on the team. This is a really powerful program that we think is going to be a big asset if we can put it in the hands of a talented, thoughtful chief culture officer to use. Okay, let's turn to support. So how are we going to address the issue of support for Chief Culture Officers? Well, it's going to start with on-demand consultation. Once Chief Culture Officers go through our training, they will have the option to stay involved with Better Culture, where we will be 24/7 available to them anytime they run into a specific problem or an opportunity. Number two, they'll receive frequent prompts and encouragements from us, reminding them to keep this as a focus and emphasizing points that we think are particularly important and problem things we're hearing from our clients, because if it's a problem in one company, it's quite likely other people are struggling with the same thing. We will be giving them ongoing regular learning opportunities. The 2-day intensive program at the launch will get off to a great start, but there will be additional content that we will continue to train individuals, our Chief Culture Officers, on over time. We're going to give them an opportunity to be part of what we call a cadre group or a mastermind group of other trained and certified Chief Culture Officers through our program. So once a month, they'll have the chance virtually to visit for an hour or 90 minutes with others who are doing these roles in other companies. This role of a Chief Culture Officer can be a bit lonely at times because frequently there's not a lot of internal expertise to turn to. So this support group, we think, is really key. And then we plan to annually gather all our Chief Culture Officers together, at least invite them to a gathering where we will spend time together sharing ideas and stories and insights. We think collectively, this is the kind of support a Chief People Officer, a Chief Culture Officer needs to be effective. Okay, the topic of power. I'm going to take you for just a second into social psychology. In social psychology, and we look at how people get power within a system, there are frequently cited 8 different ways that you can achieve or acquire power within a system. Today, I'm just going to highlight 4 of them with maybe a little comment on a 5th. The first way that you get power within a system is for it to be associated with your title. A title gives you power. It's called legitimate power. With that power frequently comes spending authority and the ability to make decisions as to where a group is going to go, what we're going to focus on, who sits at the head of the table when you come into the meeting. That frequently is because of your title power or legitimate power. That is not something we can give, but it is something the company gives, particularly to a designated Chief Culture Officer. But I want to remind you, you don't want to give power to someone who doesn't know much, doesn't know where to go to support, and doesn't even have any tools to be effective. But once they have that, we want to make sure the company is giving our Chief Culture Officers significant power within their system. The next way you can get power in a system is to have expertise. Well, when you go through what we're going to do with our Chief Culture Officers, they're going to know a lot. Our content the knowledge, that body of knowledge that we'll be covering will give them that expert power within their systems. Information power. This will come from effective use of tools. Tools give you analysis and results that give you information as to where we want to start initiatives to get even stronger and even better. The last type of power I want to mention is you can get power in a system because of the connections you have. In this situation, we're going to enhance the power of our Chief Culture Officers because of their connection to Better Culture and because of the connection they will have with that cadre group, that mastermind group of other Chief Culture Officers. One last type of power I'm going to just at least mention today for you briefly is what we call referent power. Referent power is what you get within a system because people respect and admire your personal characteristics, your fortitude, your kindness. It's always, always vitally helpful. I won't say vitally important, but at least helpful that a Chief Culture Officer either have referent power or can attain it. But the company can't give that to you, and we can't give that to you. That has to come from you. So in summary, when the designated Chief Culture Officer has solid knowledge and competent support, they should be given significant power within a work setting. The company provides the legitimate power. Better culture provides the expert, information, and connection power. So there are the 4 keys to success: knowledge, tools, support, and power. It is absolutely critical if you want to move the needle on your cultural health in a lasting and significant way. You must have a competent person who's driving this process for you. At times, that competent person will be the owner or the CEO. At other times, it's going to be your chief HR officer. At other times, it's going to be someone else in your system that you believe has the capability and the passion to be an effective chief culture officer. When we get that in place, and when we make sure that they have the knowledge, tools, support, and power, then I think we're going to take a significant step toward Better Culture's ultimate goal, which is making the world a better place to work. Okay, Dave, I see, has been sliding me questions. Thank you, Dave. So you're going to get live here response, and we'll see what I have in front of us. Question number 1. Kim, in most instances, should the chief culture officer be the CEO or the owner? Well, I guess, actually, I just answered that. I do believe that in many instances, it will be ideal if the chief culture officer is, in fact, the top leader in the organization. When I was at QLI, I was the chief culture officer. Now, to be honest, that may have been in good part because I didn't know anything about technology, HR, or finance, so there wasn't really anything else for me to stick my nose into. But in other situations, I have worked with organizations, we've consulted with, where the CEO was wise enough to know this really wasn't their thing. This really wasn't something they would be naturally good at doing. And so we work with them to identify who in your system would be the right person to take on this responsibility of chief people officer or chief culture officer. And again, several times we have identified individuals who that never became their formal title, but it was clear to everyone they were designated to drive our cultural initiatives and protect our cultural health. Okay, let's see. Number 2, does your focus on chief culture officers and your launch training program have anything in common with DEI initiatives? The answer to that is absolutely yes. Candor is a good thing at times. I don't claim that we know much about the D and even the E. Our focus is really on the I, the inclusion part of DEI. For example, the 20 tenets program I talked about that we're designing for all employees that we would love to put in the hands of a chief culture officer. One of the big goals of that program in a very positive and constructive way is to create an incredibly welcoming and supporting work environment. It seems to us that the issue of inclusion is actually a subcategory of your cultural health. And when you get the culture right, then your work and your efforts on inclusion, I think, will take root. There'll be lasting improvements. So we see some significant overlap, and we believe everything we're doing with chief culture officers is absolutely consistent with DEI efforts. Another one. How much can a chief culture officer really impact a large company? Fair enough question. Let me take just a second to comment on that. We believe chief culture officers, really talented ones, can make an impact on 2 significantly different levels. One is at the organizational level. They can affect things like making sure we're developing and delivering a terrifically effective leadership development program, leadership training program. I mentioned earlier, they know how to enhance your employee recognition processes. They have input on how maybe we could do compensation in a way that would be more effective at motivating our employees. Developing those programs for rising stars and how systemically can we identify that talent earlier? What can we do to mitigate that turnover loss we're seeing at 6 months or 1 year? And maybe even we want them to be able to deliver the internal leadership training program by use of Better Culture's online development program. That could be facilitated by a terrific chief culture officer. But that's the systemic level where they can have impact. They can also have terrific impact, as I mentioned earlier, working with individual supervisors as a coach and as a mentor. And at times you'll see some common things that those supervisors would benefit from learning, and you can work in a small group and train them in a small group. But here's something I think I should probably make really clear. If you're talking about a large organization, a large company that has multiple operational sites, a large nursing home chain that has multiple centers in maybe 50 different communities, we would strongly urge you to have a designated chief culture officer in each of those operational centers. If the questioner is inferring that in a huge organization with 20,000 employees, how much impact can one chief culture officer actually have at the top of that organization down where the rubber meets the road? The answer is a lot systemically, but you're absolutely correct. We need someone closer to those individual operational units who are monitoring and driving cultural health every day. Let's go to the next question. It is, Kim, please explain a bit more about what you mean by chief culture officers needing to have power. You know, there are some words that people just kind of step back from. They don't really love it when you say you need to have power. It sounds like I'm on a power trip for them. I'm really not, but I do believe strongly that because culture is so directly correlated to our goal of becoming successful enterprises, dominantly successful businesses, that we have to make sure that whoever is driving that initiative has enough influence. How about that for a word? Has enough influence to be effective in that role. Years ago, we had the opportunity to do our leadership training in combination or sponsored by our local HR association here in Omaha. And we have become huge advocates for the critical role of HR executives. Well, we are there now in terms of being huge advocates for the importance of chief people officers, chief culture officers, and why when you give them, yes, I know you've got it by now, knowledge, tools, and support, why at that point you want to give them significant influence inside your system. Dave is signaling me do one more and we'll be good. Let me try this one. What background or qualifications does someone need to have to attend a Better Culture Launch program? Okay, that's a very nice question. Thank you for whoever sent that in. What we're really looking for are individuals inside of organizations who have the passion to say, I want to learn what I need to learn to be effective as a chief culture officer. Now, they need to have some time. One of the reasons I've encouraged some CEOs, don't take this on yourself, is I looked at their schedule. This does not take all of your time, but it takes some time. And it can't be that it always is pushed down to the 5th priority on your list. So if I can identify someone, ideally who has that referent power, people think well of them, respect them personally, and you give them to us and allow us to give them the other 3 essentials, then I believe you will find they'll be able to significantly move the needle on cultural health. 2 parts of the question. Do you plan to offer the launch program virtually? I'm really pleased to say, no, we don't. I don't know if the rest of you are where I am, but virtual has its place, but I am more than eager to get back to live training experiences. Because of what we want to do with this launch program, interacting personally with the people that come to be trained and setting aside time to interact with others who are there, share frustrations, ideas, stories, and to start to form already what will be those ongoing cadre groups. We simply, at this point, are planning to do these trainings live. I will tell you that we are not planning to do all of them in Omaha. We're going to be looking for other venues. We're going to be moving these around the country. And in fact, we're going to be looking for partners in other cities who might be interested in hosting this kind of launch program for your region or for your area. Okay, I am going to turn this back over to Dave. But before I do, I want to thank all of you for taking the time today to join me and to listen to what we're doing. I'm hoping that we will find a good number of companies that are going to want to get on this bandwagon and are going to want to embrace the idea of putting a chief culture officer in place with the knowledge, skills, and tools to be effective. With that, I'll turn it back over to David.
Thanks, Kim. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Kim referenced our Chief Culture Officer Launch Program. This is a 2-day in-person event for those who are ready and eager to take on the role of monitoring and driving cultural health for their workplace. If you're already in a similar role, such as a Chief People Officer or Chief Culture Officer, this is a can't-miss event, but it's not limited to those with a CCO title. Again, launch is for anyone ready to take on the role of monitoring and driving cultural health for your organization. Seats will be limited for these 2-day trainings, so I really encourage you to go to betterculture.com/CCO-launch to sign up to receive notifications and details for upcoming programs as soon as they become available. Again, that's betterculture.com/CCO-launch. I want to mention one more thing while I've got you today. For those who are part of larger systems, we'd like to visit with you about conducting a Chief Culture Officer launch training program exclusively for key individuals in your organization who would be designated as a Chief Culture Officer for each of your operating centers. So please reach out to us directly if that's something we can support you on. For anyone who'd like to visit in general, please don't hesitate to contact us, info@betterculture.com. You can also call me directly at 402-770-9767. I'd love to chat with you and explore ways we could support your priorities around leadership and culture. Again, to sign up to get information for the next Better Culture CCO launch program, it's betterculture.com/CCO-launch. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone.